The Young and the Restless spoilers in the latest introductory video clip, a raw and harrowing glimpse into the nightmare that has befallen them. The camera trembled as it captured Phyllis in the throes of excruciating agony. There she was, clutching her stomach as if trying to hold together the fragments of her very life. Her face, contorted with pain, revealed an unspoken horror. Something was terribly, fatally wrong. The scene left no room for ambiguity. It appeared that Phyllis had ingested something poisonous, a sinister substance that now ravaged her insides with relentless fury. The moment the camera focused on her, Phyllis's screams filled the screen, a desperate, anguished cry that pierced through the silence. In a gut-wrenching instant, she began to vomit, and the liquid that spewed from her mouth was streaked with blood. The violent, gory spectacle was enough to send shivers down the spine of any onlooker. It wasn't merely a reaction to pain, it was a visceral, physical manifestation of an unseen toxin working its deadly magic. The chaotic scene, captured in unsteady, panic-stricken footage, seemed almost unreal, as if time had slowed down just to bear witness to her torment. Amidst this agony, the camera cut to Sharon, whose wide eyes betrayed a terror far deeper than the mere shock of witnessing physical pain. Sharon's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched Phyllis, her friend and confidant, desperately trying to offer comfort in a situation where words had long lost their meaning. Yet, even the warmth of her embrace couldn't shield her from the profound horror unfolding before her. The sight of Phyllis's suffering, the unmistakable sound of her despair, and the realization of the imminent, inevitable death that lurked in every labored breath, each element coalesced into a nightmare that would haunt Sharon for the rest of her life. As the camera lingered on Sharon's distraught face, it was clear that she was beginning to slip into a state of disassociation. Hallucinations crept into her mind, unbidden and unwelcome. In these dark, twisted visions, she saw death looming large, a specter that hovered over Phyllis, slowly extinguishing the light of her existence. Sharon's thoughts became a tortured mix of dread and desperate hope. If Phyllis were to die, it would only be a precursor to the fate that awaited her. The kidnapper, a cold and calculating monster, had already made it clear that Phyllis's demise was only the beginning. His next act of cruelty was to return her lifeless body to her family, a final, horrific gift meant to force them to confront their grief head-on, to bear the unbearable weight of their loss in the most excruciating manner possible. But the nightmare didn't end there. While Phyllis's suffering was already a macabre spectacle of agony, Sharon was trapped in the same claustrophobic hell. Locked away, isolated from any hope of rescue, she was now the kidnapper's next target. The twisted captor, a man whose heart was as barren and cold as a winter's night, had already set his sights on her. With each passing moment, Sharon could feel the tightening grip of fate, the inexorable pull toward a destiny marred by pain and betrayal. The kidnapper, whose malevolence seemed to know no bounds, was meticulously plotting how to end Sharon's life in a manner as brutal and inhumane as the poison that was devouring Phyllis from within. In a desperate bid for survival, Sharon began to plead, her voice raw with terror and regret. "Please, just let me live," she whispered, her eyes brimming with a mixture of terror and desperate sincerity. "I'll do anything you ask, anything at all." But her pleas fell upon deaf ears. The captor, with his twisted sense of satisfaction, needed no further entreaties. His intentions were clear. The sight of her submission, her willingness to sacrifice every shred of dignity in exchange for life, was all the confirmation he required. The very act of hearing her cry out for mercy only served to reinforce his perverse desire to continue this cycle of cruelty. For him, it wasn't merely about ending a life, it was about reveling in the absolute power over another's fate, about the sheer, unadulterated thrill of breaking a spirit. As the narrative of this nightmare unfolded, one question loomed large: why would a kidnapper be so cruel and vicious? What did he truly want? To some, his actions might appear senseless, a random outburst of depravity. But for those who dared to peer into the depths of his malevolence, it was evident that his motivations were far more complex and disturbing. The captor's cruelty was not born solely of a desire to inflict pain, it was a manifestation of an internal void, an emptiness that could only be filled by exerting absolute control over another human being. His actions were calculated, a perverse form of art where every moment of agony, every shudder of despair, was a brushstroke painting a masterpiece of suffering. Perhaps, in his twisted mind, this was the only way to feel truly alive, a way to silence the echoes of his own haunted past. By orchestrating such meticulous cruelty, he reaffirmed his own existence, asserting his dominance over life and death. The kidnapper's motivations, though obscured by layers of horror and depravity, hinted at a dark truth. He was not merely a man with a sinister agenda, but a creature driven by an insatiable hunger for power, control, and a grotesque form of self-validation. Every act of brutality, every calculated move to instill fear, was a step toward fulfilling an internal prophecy of his own making, a prophecy where only the most extreme expressions of power could silence the demons that haunted him. For Sharon, each passing moment in captivity was a descent into an abyss of terror and uncertainty. The stark reality of her situation was that she was at the mercy of a monster whose whims were as unpredictable as they were lethal. Her mind oscillated between desperate hope and paralyzing fear. Would the kidnapper's next move be the final act in her tragic story? Was there any chance that she could outwit a man who thrived on the agony of his victims? These questions tormented her in the dark hours of isolation, where every sound, every shadow, seemed to signal the approach of an unspeakable fate. Yet even in the midst of such darkness, a spark of defiance flickered within her. Deep down, Sharon clung to the belief that her life was worth fighting for, that the horrors she was enduring were not the final chapter of her existence. Her pleas for mercy were not just cries for survival, they were a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a silent vow that she would resist, that she would find a way to reclaim her life from the clutches of evil. And so, the grim tale continues to unfold, a narrative where every moment is steeped in despair, yet edged with the faint glimmer of hope. The kidnapper's motivations remain as elusive as they are disturbing. Was his cruelty a means to an end, a twisted ritual meant to satisfy his darkest desires? Or was it a manifestation of his inner torment, a cry for recognition in a world that had long forgotten him? The answers lie buried in the labyrinth of his mind, hidden beneath layers of brutality and despair. In the final analysis, the true horror of this situation is not merely the physical suffering inflicted upon Phyllis and the looming threat against Sharon, but the chilling insight into the nature of a human soul that has been so utterly corrupted. The kidnapper's actions force us to confront a disturbing reality. That within the vast spectrum of human behavior, there exists a capacity for cruelty that defies reason and shatters our very notions of empathy and decency. It is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest monsters are not those that lurk in the shadows, but those who walk among us, their darkness hidden behind a facade of normalcy. As the camera fades to black and the chilling silence of the aftermath sets in, one truth remains undeniable: the battle for Sharon's survival, and for her eventual liberation from this living nightmare, will be as much a struggle against the external horrors as it will be a confrontation with the darkest recesses of human nature itself. And in that confrontation, the ultimate question echoes in the void: what price must be paid for the hope of salvation, and can a soul so battered by relentless cruelty ever be made whole again? This narrative weaves together the visceral horror of Phyllis's agony with the desperate plight of Sharon, while probing the disturbing motivations behind a kidnapper who finds perverse pleasure in inflicting terror. It challenges us to ask, what drives a person to such depths of cruelty, and can there ever be redemption after witnessing such unfathomable darkness? Nick, Daniel, and Summer stood in stunned silence as they stared at the lifeless form of Phyllis. The sight of her cold, still body, so final and undeniable, brought them to tears. Their grief was raw and unfiltered. After years of hope, searching, and desperate attempts to find her, the painful truth finally had to be faced. Phyllis, who had been a guiding light and a tireless contributor to the community, was gone forever. Their sobs echoed in the gloomy corridors where she had once brought warmth and energy to every moment. For each of them, this loss was not just the end of a life, it was the end of an era, a closing chapter on memories filled with laughter, struggle, and heartfelt dedication. Nick's sorrow was compounded by a deep, gnawing sense of regret. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, there had been something he could have done to save her. The burden of guilt weighed heavily on him, even as his thoughts began to shift toward a new, terrifying realization: Sharon. Nick's eyes darted to the news of Sharon's plight, a situation that had grown increasingly dire with each passing day. His heart clenched as he thought that the vicious cycle of cruelty might now claim another victim. In the depths of his remorse and worry, he silently vowed that he must do everything in his power to prevent history from repeating itself. Daniel and Summer, sharing in Nick's grief, also felt the bitter sting of betrayal by fate. Phyllis had been a stalwart presence in their lives, a kind soul who had given so much to everyone around her. Now, watching her being reduced to a tragic statistic in a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering, they wondered aloud if fate was deliberately steering events toward a course they could not possibly endure. The sorrow of loss mingled with the gnawing anxiety that Sharon might soon be the next in line to suffer under the cruel machinations of their tormentor. The news of Phyllis's death sent shockwaves throughout the entire community. Plans for her funeral were swiftly set in motion, a somber ritual meant to honor her memory and provide a semblance of closure. Yet, beneath the surface of these ritualistic rites, a contentious debate began to simmer among the creators and writers of the program. Had the writer intentionally decided to eliminate such a beloved character? Was this dramatic exit meant to serve a larger narrative purpose, or was it a misguided decision that risked alienating the audience and dooming the future of the storyline? In hushed conversations backstage and in feverish online forums, whispers emerged suggesting that the writer's bold move could be a dangerous miscalculation. Phyllis had been a cornerstone of the narrative, a character whose depth and resilience had resonated with so many. Her sudden, brutal demise now raised a fundamental question: was the writer heading down the wrong path, sacrificing a cherished figure in the name of shock value? The prospect of permanently losing someone who had given so much to the show was not only heartbreaking but also a harbinger of more errors to come. Nick's inner turmoil deepened with each retelling of the tragic events. As he reflected on Phyllis's life, her countless sacrifices, the battles she had fought both on and off the screen, and the love she had freely given, Nick could not help but feel that the narrative was spiraling into a dark abyss. Her death was not merely a plot twist, it was an irreversible wound inflicted on everyone who had come to depend on her strength and kindness. It was as if a beacon had been snuffed out, leaving behind a darkness that seemed to foretell even graver tragedies. And as much as Nick's grief was palpable, so too was his growing dread for Sharon. Sharon, already ensnared in a nightmare of captivity and torment at the hands of a remorseless kidnapper, now appeared to be standing on the precipice of a similar fate. The same monstrous figure who had orchestrated the terror surrounding Phyllis's demise was already setting his sights on her. Each moment Sharon spent in confinement deepened her isolation, and each desperate plea for mercy echoed in the silence of a prison that offered no reprieve. For Nick, the connection was clear: if the evil that had taken Phyllis from them was allowed to continue its course, then Sharon would likely be the next victim to suffer an equally tragic end. The funeral of Phyllis was a bittersweet affair. It was a time for mourning, a chance for friends and loved ones to say their final goodbyes, to share memories of a vibrant soul now lost to cruelty and indifference. But even amid the somber hymns and tearful eulogies, an undercurrent of anxiety persisted. Some in the community whispered that perhaps this was not the end at all, that in the twisted mind of the kidnapper, Phyllis's death was merely a calculated step toward a larger, more sinister agenda. The chilling reality was that the same monstrous persona who had taken Phyllis from them was not satisfied. His evil intent seemed to be driven by a desire not only to break hearts but also to demonstrate that no one was safe from his grasp, an assertion of dominance that defied any hope of redemption. In this moment of collective grief, one question reverberated through the minds of those who had loved Phyllis: do we truly feel the weight of this loss? The answer was complex. For many, the death of Phyllis was not just the extinguishing of a character, it was a personal loss, a rupture in the fabric of a shared narrative that had once promised hope and resilience. Her absence left an unfillable void, a lingering sense of injustice and sorrow that seemed to cry out for acknowledgement. The audience, the cast, and even the behind-the-scenes creatives were forced to confront the painful reality of a story that had become as unpredictable as it was tragic. Critics and fans alike were left to wonder, why would the writer choose to remove a character who had contributed so much to the program? Was it an artistic decision meant to propel the narrative into uncharted territory, or a reckless gamble that risked alienating an audience that had come to cherish every moment of Phyllis's journey? For those who had grown up with the character, the answer was clear. Her death was not just a plot point, it was a seismic shift that threatened to undermine the very soul of the story. The shock of it all was compounded by the stark realization that, in this twisted drama, loyalty and love were met with ruthless cruelty. As Nick, Daniel, and Summer continued to mourn Phyllis, their sorrow was intermingled with a sense of foreboding. They knew that the future was uncertain, and that the darkness that had claimed Phyllis might soon descend upon Sharon as well. In the quiet moments after the funeral, as they gathered to reminisce about the laughter and tears they had shared with Phyllis, a lingering question haunted them all. Is it possible to feel any hope for the future when such cruelty has so blatantly stolen away the light of someone so dear? And now, standing at the crossroads of grief and dread, the story forces us all to ask, do you feel the sorrow for Phyllis's death? Is the void left by her absence too painful to ignore, a reminder of how fragile life can be when subject to the whims of fate and the cruelty of those who seek to control it? As the narrative continues to twist and turn, one thing remains indisputable: Phyllis's legacy, her sacrifices, and her undeniable impact on everyone around her will never be forgotten. Even as the story hurtles toward an uncertain future, her memory serves as both a beacon of hope and a stark warning of the perils that lie in wait for those who dare to trust in the midst of darkness. This unfolding tale is a tapestry of grief, regret, and a foreboding sense of impending doom. While Phyllis's tragic end has left an indelible scar on the hearts of her friends, it also serves as a grim reminder of the high stakes in a narrative where love, loss, and cruelty are intertwined. Do you feel the sorrow for Phyllis's death?